Last January, a set of devastating wildfires burned into the Los Angeles area. The fires burned some 517,000 acres and destroyed around 18,000 homes and other structures. They killed 31 people, although the death toll from indirect causes might be much higher than that. I personally had friends that were affected by these fires. But they weren't, of course, the first wildfires to affect the city of Los Angeles, more or less the state of California. 102 years ago, a devastating wildfire burned into the picturesque university city of Berkeley, destroying nearly a quarter of the city. Berkeley is a university town in a very real sense. The town was created by and for a university, or rather, at the time, college. In 1866, California College, a private liberal arts school founded in the Bay Area town of Oakland 13 years earlier, sought a more rural location, purchasing land in what was then called Contra Costa Hills. According to Visit Berkeley, a group of university trustees met on a part of the land that they had acquired, now called Founders Rock, overlooking the bay. A trustee named Frederick Billings recalled a poem by Anglo-Irish poet and clergyman Bishop George Berkeley, appropriately titled Verse on the Prospect of Planning Learning and Art in America, including the line, Westward the course of empire takes its way. Moved by the moment, Visit Berkeley explains, the trustees decided to name their town to be after the good bishop. The campus would not actually move to the new location until 1873, and by then it had merged with the state of California's Agricultural, Mining, and Mechanical Arts College to become the University of California. A town grew around the campus, with an original settlement of the wharf area called Ocean View. In 1878, Ocean View and the area surrounding the university incorporated as the town of Berkeley. In the 1890 census, the population of the town was 5,101. By 1909, the town was chartered as a city with a population over 40,000 in the 1910 census. That would grow to 56,000 in 1920. The university was not the only factor creating the unique character of the town. Art historian Robert Edwards wrote in 2014, Berkeley's charm and stunning location at the base of the forested coastal hills enticed many artists who needed a convenient weekend escape from their San Francisco associates and a venue of inspiration to sketch in unfettered nature. That small art community grew substantially after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire. The influence of both the art and the university communities resulted in a unique architectural style. The architecture design firm Sakely Architects explains, handcrafted details and natural materials, hallmarks of the influential arts and craft movement, remain deeply woven into the city's architectural character. This didn't occur strictly by coincidence. The city's north side is one described as the oldest residential area on the Berkeley Hills, subdivided in 1889. Many of the early homes were in the Victorian style with gabled roofs, but celebrated architect Bernard Maybeck, who taught at the university, began popularizing the First Bay tradition style, a reaction to the ornate Beaux Arts architecture. The tradition is heavily influenced by the arts and crafts movement and seeks to take influence from nature and emphasize the use of locally sourced materials. The typically wood-sided and cedar-shaked houses with steep roofs echoed the contour of the hills. Maybeck helped to found a social club called the Hillside Club, which according to the club building website was founded in the late 19th century to promote good design practices in the Berkeley Hills. Buildings in the style were concentrated in the north side neighborhood called Daly's Scenic Park. Kobe McDonald writes in California, a newsletter of the University of California Alumni Association. The construction of these Berkeley brown shingles was vigorously promoted by North Berkeley's Hillside Club. By 1923, the neighborhood was dense with woodsy craftsmen. 90% of them covered top to bottom in redwood shingles. It was a showcase for Berkeley's exceptional architects. But the newsletter continues. As it turns out, it was also a tinderbox. Notably, the neighborhood was closely built, often with 2 houses to a lot. September 1923 was a dangerous fire season in Northern California. The Santa Rosa Republican reported on the 17th that a large, high-pressure area of considerable intensity had been laying off the Washington coast for a couple of days. As the system moved, it reversed the normal direction of the summer winds. The result was record-high temperatures and low humidity, and winds from the Sacramento Valley that drove temperatures upwards. These winds were generally called fire winds at the time, although today the more common term is Diablo winds. These hot, dry winds occur in the Bay Area in the spring and fall, a product of high pressure inland and low pressure off the coast. This causes air aloft to sink, where it compresses, becoming hotter and drier. The Republican reported that these winds raised the temperature in the Sonoma Valley 20 degrees in just a half hour. The winds, driven by strongly sinking air, can be quite strong as well, with gusts up to 40 miles per hour coming along the downslope. Unlike the warm Santa Ana winds, the winds tend to be strongest atop peaks and ridges. The Bay Area's Sonoma Valley was beset by fires, with the Republican noted on the 17th that 6 new forest fires are raging in Sonoma County. The fires were being fought by 1,000 men, with County Fire Warden John Laughlin making an urgent call for 100 more. Fires were noted in Napa, Marin, Vallejo, Fairfield, Petaluma, and Upper Lake. The fire in Marin was driving before a gale that sweeps over Mount Tamalpais at a 90-mile rate. In Berkeley that morning, McDonald writes, the first signs of trouble were subtle. For some it was the strange amber hue of the midday light. Others caught the distinctive scent of burning eucalyptus. By 2 in the afternoon of September 17, 1923, just about everyone in Berkeley had taken note of the uncommonly warm, dry wind blowing in from the northeast. A 1923 book about the fire, compiled by Aubrey Boyd, explains, on the evening of the 16th, after a long period of dry weather, a strong north wind, always a wind of bad augury for Berkeley at this season of the year, sprang up suddenly and steadily increased in force. With it came reports of destructive forest fires to the north and east. People fell asleep listening to the rustle of the dried leaves that scuttled endlessly along the empty streets. Unheeded messages of disaster. A haze drifted over the city the next day, giving, Boyd writes, a sense of having been transferred to another region of space. Disaster was already on its way. McDonald writes, what they didn't know was that a small grass fire over the hill in Wildcat Canyon was growing fast, leaping from grass to brush to tree, and was about to crest the hills of North Berkeley. When it did, near Berryman Reservoir, the fire was a half-mile wide. Boyd explains, when the catastrophe did come, it burst with such unimagined abruptness that the fire, leaping from Wildcat Canyon into Cragmont and from there to the neighborhood of the reservoir, had already cut a swath through several streets before the alarm became general. Ironically, Boyd writes that residents, unaware that their own city was ablaze, were talking casually about forest fires in the interior, the fires the Santa Rosa Republican had mentioned. When Boyd writes, they saw long, vicious tongues of flame coiling into thievery heart at their own city. The Santa Barbara Morning Post reported, at 2 o'clock the flames had reached the crest of the ridge upon the eastern slope of which resided many of Berkeley's wealthiest citizens. Within an hour, the conflagration had eaten its way into the outer fringe of exclusive homes on the hillside and was spreading in 3 directions, wreaking havoc as it advanced. McDonald writes, a thick black cloud came pouring over the hill. The fire raced down Cardenesis Creek and bore down on the north side neighborhood that ran from the creek to the northern edge of the Berkeley campus at Hearst Avenue. The fire was incredibly hot. Boyd writes, nails in the houses in the path of the fire melted before they were touched. Buildings seemed to explode and founder in an instantaneous dissolution. The Morning Press writes that the utmost confusion reigned in the fire zone. Hundreds of residents whose homes were many blocks removed from the danger zone hastily gathered such belongings as they could and fled, with them to the areas where it was believed the flames would not reach. Hundreds of Ottawas jammed the streets on the edge of the constantly enlarging fire zone, many of them carrying refugees and others carrying squads of volunteers who lent their efforts in attempts to extinguish the flames. The city was not sitting still. Rather, the Morning Press notes, a host of volunteer firefighters already was at work in an effort to extinguish the flames, but a high wind sweeping towards them hampered their efforts, and they made little headway. McDonald writes, as the fire roared downhill, the shingled homes literally exploded in flames. Berkeley's small contingent of firefighters was forced to repeatedly abandon their positions as the wind-propelled fire speedily advanced. The Morning Press writes, as the flames progressed, hurry calls were sent out for volunteers to fight the fire, and all available firefighting apparatus in Berkeley, Oakland, and nearby cities was mobilized and hurried to the scene. But it was to no avail. Boyd writes, the fire departments of 3 cities did everything that human skill and daring can do after such a fire has gained headway. The water supply may have been inadequate, but rivers of water could have been poured into the blaze without deterring it. The Richmond, California Independent reported the Berkeley Fire Department was helpless as the flames spread from home to home and from block to block. The flames spread at the rate of a block every 10 minutes while the wind was at its height. In desperation, the firefighters went to a tactic that had been used in San Francisco in 1906, using dynamite to destroy structures in front of the fire to create a fire break. Boyd writes that as the firemen retired foot by foot before the advancing flood, dynamiting as they went, an impromptu but efficient organization of relief workers and special police looked to the comfort and safety of the refugees, who for their part met the crisis with great fortitude. Children were gathered out of harm's way, and the aged and infirm were removed from harm without injury or loss of life. But the fire was relentless. The morning press writes, for 4 hours, between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock this afternoon, the flames raged virtually unchecked, while several hundred firemen and volunteers and scores of householders with garden hoses or buckets vainly tried to halt the fire's attack. MacDonald writes, the entire city, it seemed, might be consumed. But suddenly the relentless fire relented. Boy writes, no conflagration perhaps was ever more completely out of control. None ever demonstrated more vividly its power to defy all the defensive resources of human science once it had gained headway. And, in the last resort, it was extinguished only by an act of providence. MacDonald explains, but just as the flames reached the shopping district of Shattuck Avenue to the west and Campus to the south, the wind reversed direction and the fire was blown back onto itself. With nothing left to consume, it died out. It took some time for that to happen, and then the aftermath could be seen. The morning press writes, hundreds, refugees, sightseers, and volunteer workers who stole a moment from their work or relief or directing, walked out of the narrow spur of Scenic Avenue north from Hearst Avenue to look at the wreckage of the fire. Northward, the whole sweep of the steep Cragmont Hill, which at evening seems a wall, well studded with lights, was a waste, blazing piles of debris marking the site of every home for a distance of many blocks. The only thing left standing in this region, a section occupied mainly by the well-to-do, were gaunt chimneys of their ruined homes. MacDonald explains, when North Berkeley residents returned, there was nothing to salvage. It was a naked hellscape of charred tree trunks and freestanding chimneys surrounded by bare foundations. The loss was devastating. The morning press writes, the ruined areas were the most beautiful district in Berkeley. The Grass Valley, California Union called the area burned one of the most beautiful residential sections of any city in the West. Architect John Galen Howard had helped to defend Northgate Hall, popularly called the Ark, a building that he had designed. The Ark was saved, but his own home was lost. Maybeck's home burned as well. MacDonald laments, much of Berkeley's contribution to the history of American residential architecture had been reduced to ash. Maybeck alone saw 19 of his projects consumed by the flames. Some of the losses were hard to quantify. The San Francisco Call-Bulletin reported that one of the greatest losses was that of the library of Dr. A.S. Kahn of the Department of Slavic Languages. Kahn had a lot of valuable Russian books bought before the war and the Soviet regime, and these editions could not be replaced at any price. Although the university structures themselves were not harmed, the morning press writes, many fraternity and sorority houses of the University of California were destroyed, as were the homes of several instructors. The Independent reported that 1,000 students were left homeless and will be forced to leave college as a result of yesterday's fire. Hundreds were left with only the clothes on their backs. In one extraordinary story, the Call-Bulletin told the story of Mrs. Daniel B. Langford, who had escaped the blaze with her 2 children, Elizabeth, age 8, and Dan, age 7, although their home was lost. Her husband had been teaching English at Keio University in Japan, in an area that had been struck by the great Kanto earthquake of September 1st. The day of the Berkeley fire, she had received word from the Japanese embassy that her husband was safe. She told the Call-Bulletin, I believe I'm a bit unstrung, but isn't it odd we are all homeless, but safe? Thank God. But in the midst of disaster, something astounding. Miraculously, MacDonald writes, no one was killed. The Union wrote, a great fire came over the hills, and classic Berkeley felt the sting of it in a manner not believed possible. Virtually 1/4 of that considerable city was laid waste. At final tally, MacDonald writes, 500 homes were destroyed. Damages were estimated at an astounding $10 million. But the Call-Bulletin noted, it is the consensus of opinion that the fire-devastated area is so near the university, has so much authentic claim to the consideration of home builders, and so much natural beauty that people will immediately come back to make their homes and their gardens grow again on the slopes of the charred hillsides. College professors will rebuild. Wealthy people will likewise rebuild. The character of the city was changed forever. MacDonald notes, in the aftermath, replacement homes were built with fire-resistant stucco siding and clay tile roofs, creating a delineation in house design that marks the path of the fire to this day. The fires did much damage throughout the state. The historic mining town of El Dorado was described as completely destroyed. In the end, what is perhaps most shocking about the Berkeley fire of 1923 is how eerily similar it was to the fires around Los Angeles last January. In what might be traumatic to victims of those fires, paragraphs that were published in newspapers 100 years ago could have been reprinted nearly word for word in 2025. And like in 2025, there was plenty of room for recrimination. The Oakland Post-Inquirer noted that Berkeley had a water supply problem. The city knew about it. They worried about it, the Post writes. But the critical event came too soon. The water supply failed, and the results were heartbreaking. Former Governor George Pardee complained that Governor Friend Richardson had cut the state forestry budget, limiting their ability to engage in fire prevention efforts like clearing dead timber. The cuts saved the state $175,000, Pardee notes, and cost the state millions in damages. A state review found out that the supposedly wealthy city of Berkeley only had 4 pumper trucks for 56,000 citizens, and they usually engaged in clearing fire breaks every year, but in 1923 had chosen not to save money. As with the Palisades fire last January, it's possible that the conditions in Berkeley at that time were simply so extreme that none of these efforts would have made a difference. But in the midst of disaster, in the midst of loss, people were left wondering, had we done everything we could do, and why not? And in 2025, you could add to that, how did we not learn these lessons a century ago? How are we making the same mistakes that we made 100 years ago? As MacDonald notes, lessons of disasters are soon forgotten. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.